Welcome back to my Let's Read series, and today will be the second installment of Let's Read Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order by Patrick M. Wood. And today we will be reading through Chapter 2. In the previous chapter, Chapter 1, we went over a fairly condensed history of the ideology of technocracy, tracing its origins, at least conceptually, back to the mid to late 1800s, and brought it around to where we're at today. And it also spoke of the pitfalls, the glaring pitfalls of the philosophy of scientism. We named names, expounded on the ideology, and today's chapter will be discussing sustainable development. All right. So let's go. Chapter 2. Technocracy is sustainable development. Starts off with a quote. America has more than enough democracy. What it needs is more technocracy. A lot more. Parag Khanna. To establish relevance for the reader, it is necessary to demonstrate that sustainable development is technocracy, and vice versa. Even though this will make some parts of this book redundant, it is better to cut to the chase and lay out the case in plain and clear terms. Since Chapter 1 has already provided some background for understanding technocracy, a brief explanation on the essence of sustainable development will help to clarify my assertion. The term was first coined in 1980 by the United Nations International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, or IUCN, in a document called World Conservation Strategy. Its meaning was simply conservation that balanced nature with economic development. The opening sentence of the text states, quote, "The aim of the World Conservation Strategy is to help advance the achievement of sustainable development through the conservation of living resources." It is important to note that the term is in lowercase, indicating that it was not yet considered a proper noun. In every instance in this document, it referred to economic development, which they claimed was on a collision course with depleted resources unless conservation measures were put in place to balance the two. This was clearly seen in a statement like, quote, "For if the object of development is to provide for social and economic welfare, the object of conservation is to ensure Earth's capacity to sustain development and to support all life." 3 years later, in 1983, the United Nations convened the World Commission on Environment and Development, or WCED, and appointed Gro Harlem Brundtland as the chairperson. Brundtland was formerly Prime Minister of Norway, but had a strong background in environmental issues. She was also a member of the Trilateral Commission, which, as you will remember, was exclusively dedicated to creating a new international economic order. As the Brundtland Commission was terminated in 1987, it celebrated the publication of its outcome book, Our Common Future, which in 1992 became the cornerstone document in the creation of Agenda 21 policies at the first Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro. I can't pronounce that. The Rio event was officially called the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED. The very succinct definition of sustainable development found in Our Common Future has been endlessly quoted in UN, NGO, academic, and governmental literature throughout the world ever since its publication in 1987. Quote, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. While this may sound noble, the details are problematic, as seen in statements like this. Quote, in essence, sustainable development is a process of change in which the exploitation of resources, the direction of investments, the orientation of technological development, and institutional change are all in harmony and enhance both current and future potential to meet human needs and aspirations. First, the quote process of change is all-encompassing, focusing on resources, investments, technology, and governments. When viewed through the eyes of Trilateral Commission policies, which Brundtland clearly represented, one sees a plan to completely recast global economic development. Second, quote, resources are the key concern. Of course, resources are a necessary ingredient to the production of all goods and services. The problem is that those resources tied up in personal property or in poverty-stricken nations are not available to the elite global corporations. Thus, sustainable development promoted a process to free up resources for global development. This would increase the size of the economic pie as well as their share of it. Third, quote, investments must be redirected in order to make control of resources and future development. However, who controls these investments in the first place? The problem here is that the consumer-based economy was continually bumping up against growth limitations and could not satisfy the global oligarchy's desire to expand further. Public treasuries and pension funds represented by cities and governments, continually replenished by the taxation of citizens, represented a bottomless pit of investment funds. This naturally gave rise to the concept of public-private partnerships, or P3, where corporations and governments partner on grandiose projects to supposedly stimulate economic development. P3 has taken hold in every nation on Earth and has effectively overcome the problem of springing funds from government lockup into the hands of corporate developers. Fourth, the plan saw the need to reorient technology development toward this economic development concept. Previously, most spending on technology was focused on legitimate human needs. Today, most spending on technology is focused on sustainable development and related areas such as global warming, geoengineering, connectivity, etc. Last, sustainable development calls for changes in the institutions that govern society. The problem is that existing government structures were resistant to the exploitation proposed by sustainable development. In America, this gave rise to the Clinton and Gore initiative called the National Partnership for Reinventing Government, or NPR. NPR was created by President Clinton's Executive Order 12862 on March 3rd, 1993, just 1 year after Agenda 21 was created by the Earth's Summit in Rio in 1992. Other similar initiatives around the world have radically changed how governments view sustainable development. This also created the right environment for P3s to flourish. In short, sustainable development promised the utopia of eliminating poverty, providing jobs and education for all, and protecting the environment all at the same time. Indeed, these were the sale hooks used to secure buy-in to sustainable development. Indeed, these were the sales hooks used to secure buy-in to sustainable development in the first place. Was sustainable development disingenuous, or was it for real? Pratap Chatterjee and Matthias Finger, authors of The Earth Brokers in 1994, were direct participants in the UN meetings leading up to the Earth Summit held in Rio in 1992. They were environmentalists of the original order that preceded globalization, and they were deeply disappointed in the entire process and outcome. They concluded that, quote, as a result of the whole UNCED or UNCED process, the planet was going to be worse off, not better, end quote. In further opposition, they wrote, quote, we argue that UNCED has boosted precisely the type of industrial development that is destructive for the environment, the planet, and its inhabitants. We see how, as a result of UNCED, the rich will get richer, the poor poorer, while more and more of the planet is destroyed in the process, end quote. Such early warnings from prominent UN insiders were either marginalized or totally ignored. There is no doubt that certain elements of the environment were under stress in 1992, but it was caused by the very globalization policies created by the Trilateral Commission and its members in the first place. However, free trade and industrial development were never put on the table as culprits. Instead, people were blamed for environmental destruction. Those countries with high levels of poverty were held up as the principal culprits. To solve these problems, a member of the Trilateral Commission, Gro Harlem Brundtland, proposed a solution that required even more development, increased efficiency, more technological solutions, and centralized control over resources would somehow make everything better. Of course, this was nonsense. You don't tell a drug addict that his remedy to kick the habit is to go get a pure form of heroin. Toward the end of the Earth Summit, youth representatives were allowed to give their impressions of the process and proceedings, and they selected a young lady from Kenya, Wagaki Mwangai, who worked for the International Youth Environment and Development Network in Nairobi. Her short, pointed, and shocking statement left many attendees in dead silence. Quote, the summit has attempted to involve otherwise powerless people of society in this process. But by observing the process, we now know how undemocratic and untransparent the UN system is. Those of us who have watched the process have said that UNCED has failed. As youth, we beg to differ. Multinational corporations, the United States, Japan, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund have got away with what they always wanted, carving out a better and more comfortable future for themselves. UNCED has ensured increased domination by those who already have power. Worse still, it has robbed the poor of the little power they had. It has made them victims of a market economy that has thus far threatened our planet. Amidst elaborate cocktails, travailing and partying, a few negotiators realized how critical their decisions are to our generation. By failing to address such fundamental issues as militarism, regulation of transnational corporations, democratization of the international aid agencies, and inequitable terms of trade, my generation has been doomed, end quote. While this may seem to be a harsh assessment to some readers, I am only setting up to ask this question. If sustainable development is not really about saving the planet, then what is it? In short, it is technocracy merely warmed over from the 1930s. Perhaps it could be called neo-technocracy, but we will stick with just technocracy. First, here are some differences between technocracy in 1934 and sustainable development in 1992 and onward. Technocracy versus sustainable development. Financial banking. The original technocracy movement that started at Columbia University was disgraced in 1932 and had absolutely no institutional support thereafter. Operating funds were raised with membership dues. When David Rockefeller entered the scene in 1973 with the formation of the Trilateral Commission, technocracy found its day in the sun, after which untold amounts of money poured in. Representation. Politicians, bankers, and corporatists were not allowed into early technocracy. Technocrats believed technocracy would ascend on its own without any outside help when capitalism was completely dead. The Rockefeller Group understood that technocracy could not ever take hold until these groups were actually driving it through the transitionary period. However, note that as technocracy proceeds to gain traction today, these same groups are increasingly appearing to be the so-called, quote, useful idiots of technocracy, played like violins as they promote the very system that will bury them in the end. Scope of operations. As already noted, early technocracy was focused on the North American continent plus part of South America. Today, sustainable development envelops the entire planet. This is intuitive, considering that the Trilateral Commission intended to build a, quote, new international economic order. The positive identifiers between technocracy and sustainable development are many and varied. Here are a few that stand out clearly. Energy currency. Both systems are obsessed with control over energy production and consumption. Early technocracy wanted to replace money with energy certificates, which it viewed as the only logical accounting system for a resource-based economy. Sustainable development is obsessed with carbon credits derived from energy, cap and trade programs, and the uniform transfer of energy to all parts of the planet. In 2012, the International Social Transformation Conference met in Split, Croatia, and was attended by prominent economists from around the world. The theme of the conference, was energy currency, and the subtitle was, quote, energy as the fundamental measure of price, cost, and value. Presenter topics unquestionably tied energy currency to sustainable development. A better kind of backing, helping sustainable currencies to scale, sustainable money for a sustainable economy, and money, energy, and sustainability. Control over energy. The first two requirements of technocracy concerned the control of energy. The second requirement stated, quote, by means of the registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load. This is identical to sustainable development's goal of renewable energy and the global smart grid. Everything must be finitely controlled down to the last milliwatt. Data-driven. Early technocracy proposed to collect all economic and personal data on all processes and people in society. The fifth requirement of the study course stated, quote, provide specific registration of the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual. Modern sustainable development shares the exact same obsession, where all decisions will be data-driven. according to the scientific method. Data is viewed as causative. As one industry website states, quote, "Big data is what will drive smart cities. It will be the force that ensures they become a reality." Every agency of the United Nations is served by the United Nations Statistical Division, or UNSD, that provides technical help to all other agencies, as well as mountains of data collected by itself. Resource-based. Early technocracy states, quote, there must likewise be continuous analysis of data and resources pertaining to the continent as a whole, both for the purposes of coordinating current and of determining long-time policies as regards probable growth curves in conjunction with resource limitation and the like. The Technocracy Inc. logo was the Chinese monad, or yin and yang symbol that depicted balance between production and consumption. Sustainable development is obsessed with and depends on control over resources, conservation, and preservation. One definition states that it is, quote, the organizing principle for meeting human development goals, while at the same time sustaining the ability of natural systems to provide the natural resources and ecosystem services upon which the economy and society depends. Management. Early technocracy would be managed exclusively by engineers, scientists, and technicians. Original technocrats proclaimed that, quote, it will be the function of its engineers and technologists to put into operation a permanent productive and distributive system which will harness the energy resources of the country for the mutual benefit of the entire population. Recently, a scholar and advocate of both sustainable development and technocracy stated, quote, with a science PhD and a no-nonsense attitude, Germany's Angela Merkel is Europe's parliamentary technocrat par excellence. He further stated, quote, technocrats can make big, unpopular, and painful decisions that are also urgent, necessary, and even essential for national well-being. What is a technocrat? According to Webster, it is, quote, a technical expert, especially on exercising managerial authority. And it notes that the first use of the word was in 1932. This attitude of elevating scientists, engineers, and technicians is widespread throughout the United Nations and the sustainable development communities. A final thought involves Miss Christiana Figueres, who at the time was Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC. On February the 3rd, 2015, Figueres addressed a press conference in Brussels, Belgium. Remembering that climate change is at the heart of sustainable development, Figueres' statement was shocking, yet perfectly clear. Quote, this is probably the most difficult task we have ever given ourselves, which is to intentionally transform the economic development model for the first time in human history. This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution. That will not happen overnight, and it will not happen at a single conference on climate change, be it COP 15, 21, 40, you choose the number. It does not occur like that. It is a process because of the depth of the transformation. End quote. Two things can be certain about this. First, capitalism and free enterprise are on the chopping block. And second, sustainable development is the chosen replacement. Figueres herself testifies that when this happens. Figueres herself testifies that when this happens, it will be the first occurrence of such a change in the history of the world. After an exhaustive historical inquiry, I can confidently state that the only specifically designed replacement economic model created in the history of the world was technocracy. Thus, it is clear that sustainable development is technocracy and vice versa. Making this connection now will help the reader to understand the balance of this book in its proper context. The sustainable development movement has taken careful steps to conceal its true identity, strategy, and purpose. But once the veil is lifted, you will never see it any other way. Once its strategy is unmasked, everything else will start to make sense. And that concludes the second chapter of Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order by Patrick M. Wood. Thank you for tuning in and listening if you did. And as always, I hope you learned something. I hope this information makes you think and that you share it with other people. That would be the point of this series anyway. All right. Thanks for watching. And have a beautiful and blessed day, night, evening, wherever you find yourself in the world today. I'm out. Deuces.